How's it going, everyone? Everyone doing well? Super hot outside, it's great. I love this weather. My name is Hany Fahim. I am the founder and CEO of VM Farms Inc. Really short, VM Farms is a fully managed web operations and hosting company. Basically, our job is to keep websites online. That's what we do day in, day out. Today, I'm going to carry on with a series of talks called Tales from the Offside. This one is called Earthquakes in the Moon, and basically it's about some fun times we had a few years ago. So I'm going to get right into it. Does everyone remember where they were on June 30th, 2012? Around 8 p.m.?
Yes.
Oh, you remember? Okay, so you may know what I'm talking about. I remember what I was doing. I remember vividly, I was just finishing up dinner. I had a nice pasta meal. It was tomato-based, doing the dishes. And then all of a sudden, phone started going off and disaster struck. All of a sudden, multiple site outages. First thought was, there's got to be some sort of networking issue because a lot of sites were impacted. But the servers seemed to be accessible. You know, we can get to it, so it couldn't have been the network. Next thought was we must be under attack. Somebody must be doing something really funky and trying to get on that. Maybe that was the case. Server load alerts started to come in from the entire cluster. Almost all servers in the cluster started complaining about load at the exact same time. It was very confusing. We had no idea what was going on. Again, all these questions, all at the same time, what was the pattern? Couldn't really figure it out. And it turned out only certain processes were impacted by this. And were responsible for the load. MySQL was a big one. Anyone that had MySQL running on their systems was impacted. It had really high load. Java and Ruby-based processes were also impacted. Again, really strange because they're completely segregated customers. So as an ops person, first thing we did is pulled out our trusty tool called strace. If you don't know what strace is, it's a fantastic tool. Basically, it monitors this kernel system calls between the applications and the system. So anytime you want to do things like access a file, or in this case, get the time of day, you can use strace to find that out. So we attached to one of the misbehaving processes, and it showed this really strange pattern. These processes over and over and over were asking for the time of day over and over. And every process, anyone that was impacted, was the same thing. So this is MySQL, this is Ruby, Java, and a whole bunch of other small processes. How could they all be doing the exact same thing at the same time? These were really strange questions. So then we started asking, was there some maybe time event that we didn't know about? So pulled up Google, did a quick search for time event, and lo and behold, on June 30th, 2012, at 23:59:60 UTC, a leap second was inserted into the clock. And midnight UTC actually equals 8 p.m. Eastern at this time of year. So that was exactly what was going on. So fine, very nice. What do we do about that? What is this leap second, and how do we fix this? Our goal obviously was we needed to stabilize the entire cluster. That was the first goal. So restarting some of the processes seemed to resolve the issue, but sometimes reboots were necessary. So within an hour, we pretty much had either restarted or rebooted things, and things had calmed down. All right, what just happened here? This is extremely confusing. I don't understand. What is this leap second business? At the time, I didn't really know anything about that. Apparently, 25 leap seconds before that time were inserted since 1972. Why was this particular leap second so important? Why was it special in 2012? And of course, the answer, like most things in life, is very complicated. But let's take a step back for a second. You've got to understand, why is timekeeping so incredibly important? If you really think about it, timekeeping, or time, is the universal frame of reference. It's the only way that you can get to work at the same time as everybody else. It's the way that you can correlate and coordinate events together. And in modern times, high-resolution timekeeping is absolutely essential. If anyone here runs any really high-traffic websites, you'll know what I'm talking about here. If you do, hundreds or thousands of requests a second, and you try to take a look at a web log, and you have thousands of entries, all with the exact same timestamp down to the second, it's really hard to tell different events apart. So high-resolution timekeeping is absolutely essential. We use things like atomic clocks and satellites and even celestial bodies to tell us if we're all on the same clock here. So let's take a brief history of time here. Anyone know the difference between GMT, Greenwich Mean Time, and UTC? Yes, maybe, sort of. Well, GMT, Greenwich Mean Time, was the first widely adopted time standard, and it basically kept track of something called the mean solar time. Basically, mean solar time is a day, how long a day is, and it's called the mean solar time because, as you roughly know, noon is when the sun is kind of directly overhead, except with daylight savings that screws everything up. But essentially, the mean solar time, if the sun kind of wavers back and forth throughout the course of the year, so that's why it's the mean. They have many, many different standards since then. It wasn't good enough because there was a lot of fluctuation. So they came up in the 60s with something called atomic clocks, which were fantastic. They're time-based on atomic clocks, and they are extremely accurate, down to like 1 second, I think, every 20 million years in terms of error rate. So that was great. It was extremely accurate, but the Earth is not accurate. So that's why they came up with two other standards, UT0 and UT1. These are time that is based on the exact precise measurement of the rotation of the Earth. It's always changing because the Earth is always changing. Then they came up with something called Coordinated Universal Time, or UTC. It's basically like atomic clocks, but with these leap seconds that I just talked about, in order to keep it in sync with this UT1 or UT0. And then there's GPS, and they're in their own world. They have their own standard, and they're not in sync with anybody. And if you ever have a GPS, I think right now they're almost 60 minutes off from every other clock on the planet.
Good to know.
Did you know that our days are actually getting longer? You know, we always talk about, I wish there's more hours in the day. What's actually happening? But on a much smaller time scale. The Earth's rotation is actually slowing down. So a day today is about 1.7 milliseconds longer than it was 100 years ago. To understand why, you got to take a look at the moon. So in this really crude diagram over here, the moon is actually tugging on the Earth as it rotates. As you know with gravity, the further you are, the less impact it has. So the part of the Earth that's facing the moon has the most gravitational pull from the moon. And the part that's away it has the least impact. So the Earth bulges. And as that bulge kind of turns away from the moon kind of tugs back on it. So it's kind of slowing you down that way. The result is something called tidal forces. Tidal forces, and it causes a drag on the Earth. And this actually pushes the moon further away from us, but also slows down the Earth. The moon is trying to do something. The moon is trying to do something that we did to it a long time ago. Ever notice how the moon kind of always looks the same all year round? That's because it's called a tidal lock. The moon is always facing us. That means a day on the moon's rotation is actually equal to its orbit. So it's always facing us. And the moon is trying to do the same thing to us, but we're much bigger. So we talked about slowing down. The Earth can also speed up as well. It's a living being. Major events like earthquakes can also have an impact on the rotation of the Earth. So if you remember back in 2004, December 26th, there was a massive 9.1 magnitude earthquake, and it struck the Indian Ocean off the coast of Indonesia. This is actually a diagram or an animation showing you the impact of the tsunami that kind of just went across the entire ocean there and impacted it. It was massive, absolutely massive. The force was so great that it actually changed the moment of inertia of the Earth, and a day was now 3 microseconds longer. Shorter in this case, because it actually sped it up. It was quite impressive there. And in 2011, there was a 9.0 magnitude earthquake that struck Japan. If you remember the Fukushima Daiichi plant there that kind of went, haywire right in the middle there. This earthquake was so big that it shortened the day by 1.26 microseconds. So it's clear here that time does not sit still. So to compensate for all these irregularities in the rotation of the Earth, the powers that be introduced this concept called leap seconds. The International Earth Rotation and Reference System Service, or IERS, is in charge of scheduling these leap seconds. It's important to note that they are not predictable. Obviously, you don't know when earthquakes are going to strike, otherwise we do a better job of telling people. Because of all these random events that occur, they're not predictable. So they usually announce them about 6 months in advance when they determine that the clock skew is a little bit too far for their comfort, and then the announced leap second is going to occur. Usually they happen either, they're supposed to be allowed to happen 4 times a year, but every one that has happened before then either is on June 30th or December 31st. So here's a nice low resolution diagram of all the leap seconds that have happened since 1972. All the vertical lines, still going, all right. There we go. All the vertical lines in there represent a leap second that happened, and it shows you the deviation from the atomic clocks that are there, the TAI. So every time that happened, you can see that it's not consistent. There was so many leap seconds that happened before 1999 approximately, and then between that about 7-year period, there was one leap second that happened. And this red line over here represents the one that we just had in 2015. So it's not consistent at all. So now we get to Linux. Linux and the leap second. Linux does not have a concept of a leap second. It just doesn't exist. A day, there are 86,400 seconds in a day, period. There's no such thing as a leap second. So to compensate for this, Linux must repeat the last second of the day. So anytime there's a leap second, it kind of just repeats that very last one in order to stay in sync. This requires that all Linux systems keep up to date with the latest leap second announcements, which is a little hard to do. So now the question becomes, why did things break in 2012? You know, Linux, to take a understand, you have to know a little bit about the Linux kernel. Linux has this thing called a high resolution timer, or HR timer, and it's used for timing events. So many applications, like MySQL, Java, Ruby, they rely on these HR timers to basically, you know, time events. So during 2012, during that leap second, the HR timer kept moving forward without repeating any second, but the system clock repeated that last second like it's supposed to do. All of a sudden you have these two timers these two clocks that are 1 second apart. So any timers that are set for less than 1 second would expire immediately. So if anybody here has written any software that kind of loops over itself like a daemon, and you kind of usually insert a short sleep second at the end so it doesn't hammer the system over and over again. What this did is it basically nullified that entire sleep, because when it set asleep, it said, wake me up in 500 milliseconds, the system would return immediately and say, hey, you're already 500 milliseconds too late. So it would reschedule it and it'd go over and over and over again. This is how the system load went crazy. This is what was responsible for it. But again, why did this break in 2012? There were 24 leap seconds before, since 1972. What happened here? Linux has been around since at least 2012. What is going on here? It turned out to be a bug fix in 2007. So this is a little bit of the C code here of a commit that was done. You can see that there was a bug fix, a legitimate bug fix, and they removed this call to clock was set. What this function does is it basically brings those two timers I spoke about back into sync with each other. He found a legitimate bug or race condition that only affected a very small percentage of people, and they said, you know what, this code is actually flawed. This is a leap second adjustment, and they said, we got to remove this call because it's too buggy. But by removing this, it basically impacted everyone else on the planet at the exact same time. And because it was back in 2007, there weren't any leap seconds to actually test it with. So nobody actually tested this until it actually broke everything at the same time. Very old bug. So what are the lessons learned from here? Many applications have actually fixed this bug internally into their systems because they can't rely on the kernel or anything else. They've taken it upon themselves to kind of check the time if you're ever going to set a timer. This year's leap second that just happened on June 30th, 2015, was mostly uneventful. So the systems that we run, there were only a few systems that kind of exhibited the same behavior, but it wasn't nearly as bad as 2012. There's also a quick fix. So before I told you to fix the systems, we kind of started restarting and rebooting systems. Well, in retrospect, that actually wasn't necessary once we actually dug in and found the real issue. All you have to do is set the date, and this command is actually kind of funny. It basically asks for the date and set it to itself, exactly what it is right now. But that act of setting the clock to its current time runs that piece of code called clock was set, and it actually brings everything back into sync. There are some groups out there that want to abolish the leap second entirely because of these problems. It's such a pain in the butt dealing with leap seconds. You don't understand. They want to get rid of it entirely and find some other ways of doing it. And other companies are actually deciding to take a different approach. So Google actually no longer does leap seconds. They've announced that after this last one over here. What they're doing instead, anytime there's a leap second announced, they're actually smearing an entire second over the course of 12 months. So instead of having this big jump that causes all the issues, they're going to slowly insert little fractions of a second over the course of an entire year. Systems won't know as they're trying to constantly sync up with each other. It's just going to smear it. So Google, whenever there's a leap second, is going to be up to a second out of sync with everybody else until 12 months have occurred. All this is to say, time is extremely complicated. If you think about it for a second, Y2K was a big thing, right? They talked about missing centuries. You know, as soon as the clock ticks over 2000, everything is going to go nuts. Planes are going to fall out of the sky. Economies are going to crash. Missing entire centuries wasn't really a big deal. How about leap years? When they insert entire days into the calendar, it doesn't cause any issues at all. Kind of crazy. You insert 1 second, and all of a sudden, ops people are paged, and the whole world comes to an end. At the end of the day, you got to blame the moon. It's all its fault. Any questions? No questions? Yes?
What's your opinion about smearing the second or abolishing the leap second? What do you think about that?
I actually like the smearing of the leap second. Actually, my team have been looking into it. There's some tools that you can use that'll actually contribute to that. With some settings, can actually smear the second, and actually has a lot of settings. Red Hat actually released a blog post that breaks down all the different parameters for how you can handle leap seconds besides just the jump here. And they did a lot of analysis and showed you all the side effects of doing that. We're actually for smearing the leap second, and we're doing some investigation right now to kind of eliminate the problem over here. The problem is leap seconds don't happen as often as you'd like, so testing it is going to take a while. By the time you put all the research, you're going to completely forget about it. It's going to surprise you again. Hopefully not. Oh, by the way, check your servers right now. I don't know how many of you have your graphs, but it's very likely some of you may be impacted by this. So go back to June 30th and take a look, and if you see a gigantic spike around 8 p.m. Eastern, it's probably related to this. Sometimes you don't even notice that it's happening. They're just consuming a lot of CPU cycles, but things are still running normally. So go check your graphs. Yes?
Somewhat analogous to the smearing was that something that hydroelectric companies have done since the invention of turbines, which is basically they want to keep it synced at 60 hertz, and the turbines, of course, drift, and they check it against a time standard, and they will speed up the turbines to slowly bring them back in sync.
Yeah,
and that's
exactly.
why everybody's clocks, which are based on 60 hertz, are going to keep correct time.
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly. That's actually there's so many ways of dealing with this. The problem is how do you keep in sync with everybody else? Like you saw with Google, they'll be up to a second off from everybody else, but they're so big that they think they're basically the entire planet anyway, so they don't really care.
It comes down to your requirement for measuring time.
Oh, exactly. As long as all your systems are kind of in sync, you can coordinate your own events.
But if you're measuring like microscopic time events, then you're going to use an atomic clock anyway.
Absolutely.
And it's going to be relative to your own set time. It's not going to be relative to the rest of the world.
Exactly. And actually the atomic clock, the TAI standard, is actually quite far off from the UTC standard right now because it's so persistent and UTC is not. They're actually quite smeared. I can't remember the last time. They're, I think, 14 minutes apart, something like that. I can't remember right now. But there's a website that actually shows you the clock differences, and they're actually quite significantly changed. Yes?
You said that they announced the leap seconds about 6 months in advance.
Yes.
So, in theory, is there no way that you could maybe just add one in a couple of weeks or days earlier and then have it not ruin the system, or is that?
It's the event, it's the actual setting of the clock and the bad handling of all the applications, not knowing the difference between the times. Linux has mostly fixed the problem, although that original bug is still a problem, so they had to find other ways of doing it, which is why this time it wasn't such an impact, although some applications still have trouble with the clock smear. It's the fact that something sets it, but there's multiple timers and not all of them are in sync. You can fix it by just setting the clock. You can set a cron job if you wanted to, so then immediately after leap second, you just set the clock to what it is right now and it'll just fix the problem. So there's many ways of handling it, but it's still this is for us here, but this is a widespread problem. Like everybody has to deal with this. So, leap seconds are a very big pain. Are we done? All right, thank you very much.